Your mechanic just handed you a quote. Maybe it was $3,500. Maybe it was more. He pulled the number up on his screen without opening the hood, without touching the engine, without doing a single thing that resembled actual diagnosis. He told you that modern engines have a lifespan, that 180,000 miles is borrowed time, that you should start thinking about your next vehicle. He is not telling you the whole truth. Because I want to tell you about a Ford pickup truck in Nebraska that crossed 800,000 miles on nothing more than regular oil changes, and the engine was never once opened, never rebuilt, never touched. And I want to tell you about a Toyota that was drowned in the ocean, set on fire, and had a building demolished on top of it, and the engine still started. And I want to tell you about a Chrysler engine so reliable that the dealerships selling it began to quietly lobby for its removal, not because it was failing their customers, but because it was working too well. Stay with me. Because before this video is over, I am going to show you that the industry did not lose the ability to build engines that last forever. They made a choice to stop, and I am going to show you the exact moment that choice was made and who benefited from it. The first time I understood what was really going on, I was not looking for engines. I was looking for a man named Earl Hutchins, who ran a small engine rebuilding shop out of a converted grain storage building in central Kansas. A mechanic I trusted had told me Earl was the best diagnostician he had ever met, that Earl could tell you what was wrong with an engine before he even started it, just from the way it sat on the stand. I found the building. I found Earl. And on his workbench, sitting next to a coffee mug and a stack of worn service manuals, was a Ford 300 inline-six that Earl had just pulled from a truck with 780,000 miles on it. I asked him if he was going to rebuild it. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone who has just said something embarrassing in public. He said, "Son, there is nothing to rebuild." I asked him what he meant. He picked up a flashlight, shone it down into the cylinder bore, and told me to look. The crosshatch pattern, the shallow diagonal marks machined into the cylinder walls at the factory to hold oil film, was still visible. At 780,000 miles, the original factory machining marks. Still there, still doing their job. He said the engine had never been opened because it had never needed to be opened. And then he said something I have not stopped thinking about since. He said, "Ford built this thing to outlive the man who bought it. Then they stopped building things that way. You should probably ask yourself why." So I did. The Ford 300 inline-six was introduced in 1965 and ran in continuous production until 1996, 31 years. It was never fast. It made around 101 horsepower at its peak, a number that would embarrass a modern four-cylinder in a compact car. It was not exciting. It was not sophisticated. It was a long-stroke cast-iron block with 7 main bearings supporting the crankshaft, an almost unheard-of number for an inline-six, which meant the crankshaft had virtually zero flex under load, which meant wear at the bearing surfaces was reduced to almost nothing, which meant the engine lasted. That is the entire secret. There is no mystery to it. Ford built the fundamentals so far beyond what the engine would ever actually demand of them that failure became, mathematically, unlikely for a very long time. UPS ran fleets of these engines for decades, not because they were impressive, because when you are running a fleet, the most expensive engine is the one that needs replacing. The Ford 300 did not need replacing, so UPS kept buying them and kept running them. And the trucks kept moving packages while the accountants kept being quietly satisfied, and nobody wrote magazine articles about it because there was nothing dramatic to write. The drama only started when it ended. Federal emissions standards tightening through the early 1990s made it increasingly difficult to certify this carbureted, mechanically simple engine under new clean air requirements. Ford could have re-engineered it. The cost analysis said no. And so in 1996, after 31 years and an unknown number of miles that collectively probably circle the Earth more times than anyone has bothered to calculate, the Ford 300 quietly went out of production. 800,000 miles. And it was not the road that stopped it. It was a regulation. Now I want to tell you about a different kind of immortality. Because the Ford 300 survived through mass, through thick walls and heavy iron and the brute stubbornness of over-engineering. But there was another engine built at almost the same time, on the other side of the world, that achieved the same result through a completely different method. And understanding both of them together is what finally made me understand what we actually lost. The Toyota 22RE was a 2.4-liter four-cylinder introduced in 1981. It powered the Hilux pickup and the early 4Runner. On paper, it is even less impressive than the Ford. 112 horsepower. Nothing remarkable. The kind of engine that does not make anyone's heart rate increase when they read the specifications. But Toyota had understood something that very few manufacturers have ever truly internalized. An engine does not fail at its strongest point. It fails at its weakest one. So Toyota's engineers went through this engine systematically and removed every weak point they could identify. The timing chain, not a belt, was designed to last the life of the engine. The bearing clearances were specified so tightly that variance between production units was essentially eliminated. The oiling system was over-designed for the actual load the engine would ever see. The fuel injection was electronic but simple, sensors doing exactly what was needed and nothing more, with no complexity added beyond what the function required. Every decision was the same decision: do this correctly, or do not do it at all. I spoke with a mechanic named Dennis Park, who has been working on Toyota trucks in rural Oregon for 34 years. He told me he has personally overseen the removal of 7 22RE engines from vehicles with bodies that had completely given out, rust, frame damage, collision, and transferred those engines into different chassis. 7 engines, each of which had already outlived one complete vehicle, going into a second vehicle to do it again. He said, "The engine doesn't know it's supposed to be retired. Nobody told it that part." And then there was the test. You may have already seen it. A television program in Britain took an old Toyota Hilux with a 22RE engine and subjected it to a sequence of deliberate destruction that should have killed it several times over. They drove it down a flight of concrete stairs. They drove it into a tree at speed. They submerged it in the ocean at high tide and left it there as the water closed over the roof. They set it on fire. They dropped it from the top of a multi-story car park. They parked it on the roof of a condemned building. And then they demolished the building with the truck still sitting on it and watched everything fall. After each act of violence, with only the most minimal intervention, hand tools, basic repairs, the engine started. It coughed. It sounded wrong. It leaked things it was not supposed to leak, but it ran. That truck now lives in a television studio. The engine still starts. I want to be precise about what this test actually demonstrated, because it is easy to watch it as entertainment and miss what it is actually telling you. The test demonstrated that this engine had been built with margins so far beyond what normal operation requires that even catastrophic abuse could not push it past those margins. Toyota did not build a truck that could survive being set on fire. Toyota built an engine so fundamentally over-engineered that surviving being set on fire turned out to be a side effect. That is the distinction, and it is everything. The 22RE was retired in 1997, not because it had failed, because Toyota needed to meet tightening emissions standards and improving fuel economy targets, and the architecture of this engine made those targets difficult to hit cleanly. Its replacements were more modern, more efficient, more compliant. None of them became myths. But the third engine I want to tell you about is the one that still makes me the most uncomfortable. Because the Ford 300 was killed by a regulation. The Toyota 22RE was retired by progress. Those are disappointing but understandable stories. The Chrysler Slant-Six was killed by something else entirely. In 1959, Chrysler engineers had a packaging problem. They needed to fit a tall inline-six engine under a hood line that did not have room for it upright. The solution they arrived at was almost embarrassingly simple. Tilt the engine 30 degrees to the side, lower the profile, solve the clearance problem, move on to the next item on the list. What happened next? Nobody planned. By tilting the engine, the engineers accidentally improved the lubrication geometry. Oil reached critical surfaces more efficiently than it did in an upright configuration. The intake manifold, now running at an angle, distributed fuel mixture more evenly across all 6 cylinders. The exhaust manifold had room to breathe properly for the first time. Even the spark plugs became dramatically easier to access, a small detail that would matter enormously to every mechanic who worked on one of these engines over the next 27 years. None of this was intentional. All of it worked. The Slant-Six ran in production from 1960 to 1987. It powered Dodge Darts and Plymouth Valiants, and a long list of other Chrysler products through decades of use by people who, for the most part, never thought about their engines at all. They just drove, and the engine just ran. A fleet manager at a municipal government in the American Midwest, I am not going to give his name because he told me this story informally, over coffee, and I do not think he expected it to end up anywhere, discovered that one of his department's Dodge Darts had been running for an extended period with essentially no oil in the system. The dipstick was reading dry. The engine had been operating in conditions that should have produced catastrophic bearing failure within minutes. When the engine was finally inspected, the damage was not what it should have been. Not what the physics of metal-on-metal contact without lubrication demanded it be. He told me he had the engine checked twice because he did not believe the first inspection. Both inspections said the same thing. Whether that specific story, with those specific details, is precisely accurate in every particular, I genuinely cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that it is completely consistent with what Slant-Six owners reported across decades of ownership. This engine was simply, at a level that defied straightforward explanation, reluctant to fail. And that reluctance is what killed it. Here is the part I want you to understand, because it is the part the industry will never say out loud. A service department runs on repair revenue. Every car that comes in for a major job, an engine rebuild, a head gasket, a timing chain, represents money. Every car that does not come in represents money that did not happen. And Chrysler dealerships, through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, began noticing a pattern with the Slant-Six. Customers were not coming back for major work, not because they were going to other shops, because there was no major work to do. The engine that was working perfectly for the customer was, from the dealership's perspective, failing to generate revenue on a schedule that made the service department viable. Industry accounts from people who worked inside the Chrysler dealer network during this period, service managers, regional representatives, people who were in the rooms where these conversations happened, describe a sustained, quiet pressure on Chrysler corporate to move away from the Slant-Six toward engines that would require more regular professional attention. I want to be careful here. I am not telling you there was a meeting where someone decided to destroy a good engine. I am telling you that the financial incentives pointed in one direction. The people whose incomes depended on those incentives pushed in that direction. And the engine that was causing the problem quietly disappeared from production in 1987. It was not killed by a flaw. It was killed by doing its job too well. Now, I want to address what some of you are already thinking, because these are fair objections and they deserve real answers. The first one is, are these stories actually true? The Nebraska farmer, the ocean submersion, the dry engine that kept running. How much of this is documented, and how much of it is the kind of story that gets better every time it is told? The honest answer is that the core facts are documented. The Ford 300's production run, its engineering specifications, its use in commercial fleets, all of that is in the record. The Toyota Top Gear test exists on video and can be watched right now. The Slant-Six's production history and the timing of its retirement relative to the dealer complaints, that is documented in Automotive trade publications from the period. The specific individual stories, the Nebraska farmer with the exact mileage, the fleet manager with the dry engine, those exist in the same space that a lot of real mechanical knowledge exists in, passed between people who work on machines, in shops and garages and barnyards, in the way that useful information gets transmitted when the industry stops teaching it officially. I believe the underlying truth of those stories. I cannot give you a notarized affidavit. The second objection is the one that actually matters. So what? These engines are gone. They are not being made anymore. What is the point of knowing about them? And my answer to that is this. The point is understanding what was actually possible. Because the industry will tell you, has been telling you for 30 years, that modern complexity is necessary. That the sensors and the modules and the computer controls are what make engines reliable. That going back to simplicity would mean going back to unreliability. The Ford 300 and the Toyota 22RE and the Chrysler Slant-Six prove that is not true. Simplicity, done correctly, produces reliability that complexity has never matched. The engines that ran for 800,000 miles without being opened did not do it because they had more technology. They did it because they had less. And what they had was built to margins that modern cost accounting will not permit. That is the knowledge worth having. Not because you can go buy a new Slant-Six, but because it tells you something true about the machines you already own, and about what it actually means to maintain them the way they deserve to be maintained. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. I cover automotive history and mechanical knowledge that has quietly been pushed out of the mainstream conversation for reasons that are not always as simple as progress. Every week. In the next video, I am going to cover the diesel engines that took this philosophy and pushed it even further. The Mercedes OM 6117 that Moroccan taxi drivers ran past 2 million kilometers on original engines. The Cummins 5.9 that was designed for industrial equipment and accidentally became the most legendary diesel pickup engine in American history, and the International DT466 that has been in continuous production for over 50 years because school districts discovered that the engine outlived the buses it was installed in and started pulling it out of retired bus bodies and dropping it into new ones. These are not stories about nostalgia. They are stories about what engineering looks like when the person behind the wheel is the priority. Not the warranty schedule, not the service interval, not the parts replacement cycle. Earl Hutchins is still in Kansas. He still rebuilds engines out of that converted grain building. The Ford 300 that was sitting on his workbench the day I visited him. He cleaned it up, checked the tolerances, declared it serviceable, and sold it to a man in Colorado who needed a replacement for a truck he was restoring. That engine is running again. It does not know it was supposed to be retired. Nobody told it that part.